80-year-old trucker Bullied at rest stop. He made one call. Every rig within 200 miles showed up. The coffee cup hit the asphalt at 11:47 p.m., shattering into pieces that caught the fluorescent lights of the Nebraska rest stop like broken stars. And Jack "Old Iron" Morrison watched it fall in slow motion, his 78-year-old hand still steady despite the shove that had sent it flying. Three men in their 20s stood in front of him, their laughter cutting through the diesel-scented night air like knives, their phones out and recording, because humiliating an old man was apparently entertainment now, content for whatever social media cesspool they crawled out of. Jack's Kenworth W900, a 1987 model he'd maintained like a cathedral for 36 years, sat 50 feet away in the truck parking area, its chrome gleaming under the security lights, a monument to a different era when the road meant something. More than just moving freight from point A to point B. "Look at Grandpa trying to drive a big rig," the tallest one said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Shouldn't you be in a nursing home instead of taking up space real truckers need?" The other two laughed, circling Jack like wolves who'd found prey they thought was too old to fight back. They were wrong about that, dead wrong, because Jack Morrison had been driving trucks since 1969, had served 2 tours in Vietnam before that, and had survived things these kids couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. But Jack was also smart enough to know that fighting 3 men 50 years younger would end badly, and that the world had changed in ways that made being right less important than being recorded, where one wrong move could destroy a reputation built over 5 decades. So instead of throwing the punch, his Marine Corps training had taught him, instead of showing these punks what an old man with nothing to lose could do, Jack reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers, weathered and scarred from a lifetime of mechanical work and hard living, moved across the screen with surprising precision, opening the CB radio app that connected him to every trucker within 200 miles. What he was about to do would either be the most beautiful thing he'd ever witnessed or proof that the brotherhood of the road had died somewhere between the old days and now, replaced by isolation and indifference, and the slow erosion of everything that had made trucking a calling instead of just a job. Breaker, breaker. This is Old Iron at the mile marker 340 rest stop on -80, and I got myself a situation that requires the immediate attention of anyone who remembers what it means to be a trucker, what it means to stand up for your own, what it means to show these young punks that you don't disrespect a man who's been keeping America moving since before their parents were born. The story of Jack Morrison was the story of American trucking itself, a living history written in logbook pages and delivery receipts, and the 1.5 million miles he'd driven without single accident. He'd started hauling in 1969, fresh out of the Marines, driving a 1965 Peterbilt with no power steering and a 4-speed transmission that required arms like steel cables to operate. He'd driven through the oil crisis, through deregulation, through the CB radio boom and the digital revolution, through marriages and divorces and the death of his son in Iraq, through economic collapses and industry changes that had driven most of his generation into retirement or graves. But Jack kept driving because the road was the only place he'd ever felt truly free, the only place where his past didn't matter and his future was just the next delivery, the next sunrise, the next truck stop where someone might remember his name. He'd become something of a legend in trucker circles, the old-timer who refused to quit, who still drove a truck older than most drivers on the road, who could fix anything with a wrench and some wire and the kind of mechanical intuition that came from decades of necessity. Younger drivers sought him out at truck stops, asking for advice about routes and maintenance, and how to survive the loneliness that came with long-haul life. Jack always had time for them, always shared his knowledge freely, because he remembered being young and scared and alone on the highway, remembered the older drivers who'd helped him, and he believed in paying that forward, in maintaining the chain of wisdom and support that had kept truckers connected across generations. But lately, Jack had been feeling the weight of his years, the way his back ached after 12-hour drives, the way his eyes took longer to adjust to headlights, the way the industry had changed around him into something he barely recognized. The new electronic logging devices, the corporate megacarriers that treated drivers like replaceable parts, the rest stops that had become dangerous places where theft and violence were common, the young drivers who saw trucking as just a paycheck instead of a brotherhood. All of it made Jack wonder if he was the last of a dying breed, if the road he loved had become something else entirely, something cold and mercenary and mean. And now here he was, being bullied by three kids who probably couldn't back a trailer to save their lives, who saw an old man and thought they'd found easy prey, who were recording his humiliation for likes and shares, and whatever digital validation they craved. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that Jack Morrison wasn't just some random old trucker. He was a node in a network that stretched across 48 states, a respected elder in a community that still believed in taking care of its own, and the call he just made was about to bring down a response that would teach them a lesson about respect and consequences, and the fact that some things, some bonds, don't die just because the world gets harder. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened next at that Nebraska rest stop is going to show you that the old ways aren't dead. They're just waiting for the right moment to remind everyone that community and loyalty and standing up for each other still matter, still have power, still can change everything when people decide that enough is enough. Within minutes of Jack's transmission, his phone started buzzing with responses. Old Iron, this is Mama Bear. I'm 30 miles out eastbound. Be there in 20 minutes. This is Nighthawk. I'm at the Ogallala truck stop, rolling now. Diesel Duke here. I got 5 rigs. With me at the Grand Island Plaza. We're coming in hot. This is Wildflower. I'm 40 miles west and I'm bringing friends. The CB channels lit up like a Christmas tree, the digital network of truckers sharing information at light speed. Because Jack Morrison wasn't just any driver, he was Old Iron. And when Old Iron called for help, you answered, period, end of discussion. The 3 men who'd been harassing Jack were still laughing, still filming, completely oblivious to what was coming. The tallest one, who seemed to be the ringleader, stepped closer to Jack, invading his space with the kind of aggressive posturing that came from never having faced real consequences. What are you going to do, old man? Call the cops. By the time they get here, we'll be gone, and you'll just be another pathetic video on the internet. His breath smelled like cheap beer and entitlement, and his eyes held the empty cruelty of someone who'd never learned that actions have consequences, that the world eventually teaches hard lessons to those who refuse to learn them gently. Jack just smiled, a thin, knowing smile that came from having seen this movie before, from understanding that bullies are always surprised when their victims fight back, always shocked when the world doesn't bend to their will. Son, I'm not calling the cops, I'm calling family. And they're already on their way. The kid laughed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes now, a hint that maybe he'd miscalculated. Maybe this old man wasn't as helpless as he looked. His friends shifted uncomfortably, their phones still recording but their postures less confident, the pack mentality starting to crack as doubt crept in. The first truck arrived at 12:03 a.m., a Freightliner Cascadia that pulled into the rest stop with its air horn blaring, a sound that cut through the night like a war cry. The driver, a woman in her 40s named Sarah Mama Bear Chen, climbed down from her cab with the kind of purposeful stride that said she wasn't here to negotiate. She was followed seconds later by 2 more trucks, then 3 more, then a convoy that seemed endless, 18-wheelers pouring into the rest stop from both directions, their headlights creating a wall of illumination that turned night into day, their engines rumbling in a symphony of diesel power that vibrated through the ground like an earthquake. Within 15 minutes, the rest stop was packed with trucks, at least 40 of them, their drivers emerging from their cabs like soldiers answering a call to arms. They ranged in age from 20s to 70s, Men and women of every race and background, united by the common bond of the road and the unspoken code that you protect your own, especially your elders, especially someone like Old Iron, who'd earned his place in the Brotherhood through decades of service and integrity. They formed a semicircle around Jack and his harassers, not threatening, not violent, just present. A wall of human solidarity that said clearly and unmistakably, "You picked the wrong old man to mess with." The three young men had gone pale, their phones still recording, but their hands shaking now, their bravado evaporating like morning fog under the sun. They were surrounded by trucks and truckers, outnumbered 20-1, and the reality of their situation was sinking in with the weight of a loaded trailer. The tallest one tried to laugh it off, tried to maintain his swagger, but his voice cracked when he spoke. "What is this, some kind of trucker gang? You can't do anything to us, we'll call the cops, we'll press charges." Marcus Ironhorse Sullivan, who'd driven 3 hours from Colorado when he heard Jack's call, stepped forward, his 6'3" frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the young man whole. "Nobody's going to do anything to you, son. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to educate you. See, you made a mistake tonight. You thought you could disrespect one of our elders, humiliate a man who's been driving trucks since before you were born, and there wouldn't be consequences. You thought wrong." Sarah, Mama Bear, Chin pulled out her own phone, started recording the three men, their faces clearly visible in the harsh light of 40 sets of headlights. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to apologize to Jack, sincerely and publicly. Then you're going to delete whatever footage you took of him. And then you're going to post an apology video explaining what you did and why it was wrong. And you're going to tag it with enough information that anyone who sees your original video will see your apology too. And if you don't, well, this video of you surrounded by 40 trucks and looking scared out of your minds is going to go viral instead. And trust me, the internet is much less forgiving than we are." The young men looked at each other, the reality of their situation finally penetrating their alcohol-fogged brains. They were caught, recorded, surrounded, and facing a choice between humiliation on their terms or humiliation on the truckers' terms. The tallest one, whose name turned out to be Brandon, looked at Jack with something that might have been the beginning of shame. We didn't mean, we were just, you were just being bullies," Jack said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 78 years of living, of seeing the best and worst of humanity, of understanding that most people aren't evil. They're just thoughtless, just cruel in the casual way that comes from never having to face consequences. You saw an old man alone, and you thought it would be fun to make him feel small. You thought it would be entertaining to humiliate someone who couldn't fight back. You thought wrong. And here's where I need you to understand something important. Because what happened next wasn't about revenge or violence or teaching these kids a lesson through fear. Hit that subscribe button right now, because you're about to witness something that shows the real power of community, the way that standing together and demanding respect and accountability can change hearts and minds in ways that punishment never could. This is the kind of story that needs to be heard, that needs to be shared, because it reminds us that we have choices about how we treat each other, and those choices matter. Brandon, the ringleader, took a shaky breath and stepped forward, his phone still in his hand but his posture completely different now. Shoulders slumped, eyes down, the swagger gone and replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry. We were drunk and stupid, and we thought. I don't know what we thought. That it would be funny, I guess. But it wasn't funny. It was cruel and wrong, and you didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that." His voice cracked on the last words, and Jack could see tears forming in the kid's eyes, real emotion breaking through the armor of adolescent invincibility. Jack looked at the young man for a long moment, weighing his words, measuring his sincerity. He'd been lied to enough times in his life to know the difference between real remorse and performance, and what he saw in Brandon's face was genuine shame, the kind that comes from suddenly seeing yourself through other people's eyes and not liking what you see. "Apology accepted," Jack said finally. But you need to understand something. I'm 78 years old and I've been driving trucks for 54 years. I've hauled everything from produce to steel, from livestock to military equipment. I've driven through blizzards and tornadoes, through riots and recessions. I've buried friends and family. I've survived wars and divorces and economic collapses. And through all of it, the one thing that kept me going was the knowledge that I was part of something bigger than myself. A community of people who looked out for each other, who respected each other, who understood that we're all just trying to make it through this life with some dignity intact. Jack's voice grew stronger, more passionate as he spoke, and the truckers around him nodded in agreement, recognizing the truth of his words. When you disrespected me tonight, you weren't just attacking an old man. You were attacking everything that community stands for. You were saying that experience doesn't matter, that age doesn't deserve respect, that it's okay to hurt people for entertainment. And that's not the kind of world I want to live in, and it's not the kind of world these folks want to live in either. That's why they came. Not to hurt you, but to show you that actions have consequences, that you can't just go through life treating people like garbage without someone eventually calling you on it. The other two young men had moved closer to Brandon, their own faces showing varying degrees of shame and fear and confusion. One of them, a shorter kid with a scraggly beard, spoke up. "We'll delete the videos. We'll post the apology. We'll do whatever you want. Just please don't hurt us." His voice was small, childlike, and Jack felt a pang of something that might have been pity because these kids were so young, so stupid, so completely unprepared for the reality that their actions could summon this kind of response. "Nobody's going to hurt you," Marcus repeated, his voice gentler now. "But you need to understand that this is your one chance. You mess up like this again, you bully someone else, you think it's funny to humiliate people who can't defend themselves, and word will get around. The trucking community is smaller than you think, and we have long memories. You don't want to be known as the guys who disrespect elders, who prey on the vulnerable. That's not a reputation you can come back from." Sarah pulled out her laptop, set it up on the hood of a nearby car, and gestured for the three young men to come over. "All right, let's make this apology video. And it better be good, because if it's not sincere, if it's not heartfelt, we're going to know, and we're going to make you do it again until you get it right." The three men huddled around the laptop, their faces illuminated by the screen's glow, and began recording their apology. Brandon spoke first, his voice shaky but genuine, explaining what they'd done, why it was wrong, and how sorry they were. His friends added their own apologies, and by the end, all three were crying, the weight of their actions and the consequences finally breaking through their defenses. While the apology video was being made, other truckers had gathered around. Jack checking on him, making sure he was okay, offering coffee and food and the kind of quiet support that comes from people who understand what it's like to be vulnerable, to be alone, to face the world's cruelty without backup. Tommy Wrench Martinez, a mechanic and former trucker, examined Jack's hands where he'd scraped them, catching himself when he was shoved. "You good, old iron? Need anything? Want us to take you to a hospital?" Jack shook his head, a smile spreading across his weathered face. "I'm fine, Wrench. Better than fine, actually. You all came. I wasn't sure you would, wasn't sure the Brotherhood was still alive, but you came. Every single one of you dropped what you were doing and came to help an old man who got pushed around by some kids. That means more to me than you'll ever know." His voice broke on the last words, emotion overwhelming him, and suddenly he was surrounded by truckers hugging him, patting his back, telling him that of course they came, that he was family, that you don't abandon family no matter what. A younger driver, a man in his 30s named David Nighthawk Rodriguez, spoke up. "Old iron, you taught me how to double clutch when I was just starting out, remember? At that truck stop in Wyoming 5 years ago. I was struggling, about to give up, and you spent 2 hours with me in the parking lot, teaching me the technique, showing me that I could do it. You didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, but you helped anyway because that's who you are. So when I heard your call tonight, there was no question. I was coming, and I was bringing everyone I could find. Other drivers shared similar stories, a chorus of testimonials about times Jack had helped them, taught them, supported them. He'd lent money to a driver whose truck broke down. He'd talked another driver out of suicide during a particularly dark night. He'd organized a fundraiser for a trucker's family after a fatal accident. He'd been a mentor, a friend, a father figure to dozens of drivers over the decades, and now they were repaying that kindness, showing him that the seeds he'd planted had grown into a forest of loyalty and love. The apology video was completed and posted, tagged with enough information to ensure maximum visibility. Within hours, it would go viral, not as a humiliation video, but as a redemption story, a tale of young men who made a mistake and faced consequences and learned from them. The original video of Jack being harassed was deleted from all 3 phones, the footage erased as thoroughly as modern technology allowed. The young men stood before Jack one more time, their faces red and tear-stained, their postures humble. "Mr. Morrison, is there anything else we can do? Anything to make this right?" Brandon asked, his voice small and sincere. Jack thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, there is. I want you to remember this night. Remember what it felt like to be surrounded, to be scared, to face consequences for your actions. And the next time you see someone vulnerable, someone who can't defend themselves, someone who's alone and scared, I want you to help them instead of hurting them. I want you to be the kind of men who make the world better instead of worse. Can you do that?" All 3 nodded vigorously, and Jack could see in their eyes that something had changed, that the lesson had been learned in a way that would stick. They weren't bad kids, just thoughtless ones, and sometimes thoughtless people need to be shocked into awareness, need to see the consequences of their actions in stark, undeniable terms. The truckers had provided that shock, had shown these young men that the world was watching, that actions mattered, that you couldn't just hurt people without someone eventually holding you accountable. As the young men left, walking quickly to their car and driving away, with none of the swagger they'd arrived with, the truckers began to disperse. But not before organizing an impromptu convoy escort for Jack, a dozen trucks that would follow him for the next 100 miles, making sure he was safe, making sure he knew he wasn't alone. Marcus walked with Jack back to his Kenworth, admiring the vintage truck's immaculate condition. "You know, old iron, you could retire. You've earned it. You've given enough to this industry." Jack climbed into his cab, settling into the worn seat that had molded to his body over 36 years, running his hands over the steering wheel like a man greeting an old friend. "I know I could retire, Iron Horse. But then what? Sit in a rocking chair and wait to die? Watch TV and wonder what I'm missing on the road? No thanks. I'll drive until I can't anymore, until my body gives out or my mind goes or the dot finally takes my license. Because this truck, this road, this life, it's all I've got. It's all I've ever wanted. And nights like tonight, when I see that the brotherhood is still alive, that people still care about each other, that the old ways aren't completely dead, well, that makes every mile worth it." The convoy formed up, 12 trucks falling into line behind Jack's Kenworth there, lights creating a river of illumination on the dark highway. They drove through the Nebraska night, a procession of solidarity and strength, and Jack felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that the industry he loved wasn't completely lost to corporate efficiency and digital isolation. Hope that the values he'd spent his life upholding, respect and loyalty and community, still mattered to someone. Hope that when his time finally came, when he drove his last mile, someone would remember him not just as a driver, but as a man who'd made a difference, who'd helped people, who'd kept the faith. The story of Old Iron's stand at the Nebraska rest stop spread through the trucking community like wildfire, shared on CB channels and social media, told and retold at truck stops and rest areas across the country. The apology video went viral, garnering millions of views and thousands of comments praising the truckers who'd responded and the young men who'd owned their mistake. It became a teaching moment, a cultural touchstone, A reminder that accountability and consequences and community still existed in a world that often seemed to have abandoned those values. Jack continued driving for another 3 years, finally retiring at age 81 when his doctor told him that his heart couldn't take the stress anymore. He sold his beloved Kenworth to a young driver who promised to maintain it with the same care Jack had shown, and he moved into a small apartment near a truck stop in Wyoming where he could still visit with drivers, still share his stories, still be part of the community that had defined his life. On his last day of driving, a convoy of over 100 trucks escorted him home, their air horns blaring in a symphony of respect and gratitude that echoed across the mountains like thunder. The three young men who'd harassed Jack that night in Nebraska all went on to become truckers themselves, inspired by the community they'd witnessed, by the values they'd seen in action. Brandon, the ringleader, eventually met Jack again at a truck stop 5 years later, now a professional driver with his own rig and a reputation for helping younger drivers learn the ropes. He thanked Jack for the lesson, for the second chance, for showing him that it's never too late to become a better person. Jack just smiled and poured him a cup of coffee, because that's what you do for family, and that's what the kid had become. The brotherhood of the road continues, carried forward by drivers who remember the old ways, who understand that trucking is more than just moving freight. It's about community and loyalty and standing up for each other when the world gets hard. They tell the story of old iron and the night 40 trucks showed up at a rest stop to defend an elder, using it as a teaching tool for new drivers, a reminder that actions have consequences, and that respect is earned through decades of service and integrity. And somewhere on I-80 in Nebraska, at mile marker 340, there's a rest stop where truckers still gather, where they still look out for each other, where the memory of that night lives on in the collective consciousness of a community that refuses to die. The road is long and lonely, but no one travels it alone. Not really. Not when you're part of something bigger than yourself. Not when you understand that the miles we drive together are more important than the miles we drive alone. Not when you know that one call, one transmission on the CB radio can summon an army of chrome and diesel and human solidarity that says clearly and unmistakably, we take care of our own, we respect our elders, and we will not let you hurt our family without consequences, without accountability, without learning that the brotherhood of the road is real and powerful and eternal, as long as even one driver remembers what it means to answer the call.